Just give me a second to get my audio a little bit louder. Let's see if I can add a little bit more gain. Okay, hopefully that's going to sound a little bit better for the rest of this session. So yeah, so last time I got a little bit stuck on actually trying to create a record, and that was just because I made a small typo somewhere in the code, which was preventing yeah, I had a few issues in the code. I can't remember exactly what they were, but what we were trying to do last time was basically create a chat record from the payload that was coming in from the front end. So, sorry, not the front end, that was coming from the API request as a payload. So what we're going to do now is just start our server, and basically this session is going to be all about finishing up the chat message endpoint. So we're going to be creating a chat, retrieving the chat, update the chat, and what's the last one we want to do? I don't know. I don't think we want to do the delete chat part. We're just going to leave it as that. Yeah, so let's go ahead and we'll start implementing these features. So normally when an endpoint is talking directly to the database record, it doesn't always help, because there's sometimes we need to have some kind of business logic. So the way I like to do things is to have an implement use case, something called the use case, that actually takes in the incoming request, validates the request is correct, and if everything's correct, it's going to talk to the database, sends a response back. And you can do other things as well, like logging, or if you want to pass any kind of messaging on like a message bus or whatever, you could do everything inside of that use case. The cool thing is that you can also test the use case. So over a period of time, all the important methods of your source code are unit tested. So this was good, but we're going to actually get rid of this, and we're going to go ahead and start using use cases. So in the chats, we're going to create a new file called usecases/create chat.ts, and this is going to export there we go, and that is going to require the payload and the session. Session is the info so let's make sure we have don't have a session. Let's just leave it as any. Wondering. Right. We do want to create a model. Let's go ahead and create an auth. It helps to have a and this will make sense in a second. I think the decoded token is supposed to be similar to what happens when you verify. It's going to be decoded ID token. There we go. That's what we need. Decoded token is a decoded ID token. Perfect. So our model is going to be let's import this from Firebase, and that's basically the model of the session. And the reason why we have an object of this type is because we are using the auth guard, and auth guard, as it activates, it's going to make sure that the request has a session object, and that session object is basically everything from the session object, including the decoded token and also the token itself. So that's what we're making sure we have access to. So we're going to, let's just import this from our use cases, but we should rename this just to avoid confusion with the endpoint. So that's our create chat use case. This is going to take the payload, which is a chat and also auth session, and it's going to respond back with a promise. So that is I think that's what it's supposed to be. Let's go ahead and import all of the missing imports. Okay. So first, we want to make sure that we'll add an ID for the chat object. And what's in the chat objects? Let's just take a quick look at it. So we've got the ID, self, admins, and participants. Right. So make sure the admin array includes the current session owner. This is like super boring stuff, and so it's not very interesting. I mean, sometimes you just have to deal with the boring parts as well. Participants, make sure. Okay. So we need to import a library called UUID, I think. Let me see if, yeah, that's right. Then we can import okay, looks like we're missing the types, so let's go ahead and import that as well. Install the package. All right, now that the package is here, we are going to use the v4 version. Okay, perfect. So that is an ID that's been generated. We also want to make sure ready. Doesn't include it, we're just going to throw I think I had added a series of handy error messages. It's going to be a bad request failure, and the message here should be that user must be an admin to create the chat, and then type of a bad request. So the reason why we're using this kind of approach to create failures is going to be useful later on when we can create like a generic error handler in the entire application that reads the type of an error message, and it responds with like 404 or 400 or 401 or whatever the appropriate error message code is. So we'll do another step here for the validation. We want to make sure that the participants are in this. So this particular user is also the participant. Must be a participant. We can always clean up the error messages later. So now what we can do is chat.create payload record. Perfect. So that should be good for now. We should also be able to pass in the logger just to be able to make sure that so it also helps to pass the logger in here, but honestly payload and session are immediately necessary for the actual implementation, but kind of is silly to include services that are not important to the actual code but are still kind of necessary. So normally what I do for this kind of a scenario is, rather than having a function like this, I usually just say that requests logger, but this returns a function that takes in the following, as you can see, and that returns honest chat, and then everything here gets implemented down here. The benefit of that is that wait, what's going on? Right, so you also want to say that's an async function. Okay, awesome. So now I can pass in as any number of services that we need to pass in. Like, so sometimes we may need like a config service, or we may need like a auth service, or anything else that is not crucial for the actual implementation but necessary to act as glue. We can actually just do that, and then I can go ahead and make sure we log a little bit. Let's just say payload, so get a good look at what the record is before it's being created. We also want to make sure when the chat is being created, let's get rid of this. That's better. Yeah. So one thing I'm not sure if we're going to be doing this cleanly is I want to make sure that the created at is updated, and also the payload created by is also set correctly, and that is going to be coming in from these properties. I don't think we need to modify anything else because we just want to make sure that it's here. I guess we also want to have a couple of other checks. That is, if the chat type is self, make sure only one admin and one okay. So that means if and zip to 1. Sorry, they both have to be the same. I'm just curious if I can do something like assert, but I don't think that stops my flow. If that is not true, if this is not true, then we can always improve the messaging later. One participant and one. Actually, self-chat are not something that we need to be worried about. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove it. So in the future, if self-chat is what you're going to be using, it just means that the messages never really leave. It's like notes to self. So that's irrelevant. Okay. So I feel like now might be a good time to try. Okay, so we now have a payload for the method. When it gets into here, we're going to have a payload that is for create chat. Let's try this out. Let me share the whole screen here. All right. So let's make sure we are logging in. Let's use the same message from yesterday. We have our sign-in token. Let's copy all of this. Let's scroll until we find the sign-in. This is just a temporary method that I don't plan on making part of the actual code. So that's why it's like this. And we are going to delete the stuff that's not necessary. Yeah, there we go. So let's log in. I'm going to save this in here. Perfect. Let's grab the ID token and we're going to save it as the let's minimize the auth. Let's add it in here and we can now try to create a chat. So let's go ahead and try this out. We don't need created ad, we don't need updated ad, we don't need any of this stuff. We do need type. Oh yes, that's right. So one of the things we want to make sure that is it is either private or script. And this kind of validation is really tedious, and we don't really like to do all of this stuff. And there's like really there's definitely better ways to do this, and one of the ways we're going to do this is in the future is using JOI, which is a library that's used to define schemas and validate schemas. So that's going to reduce a lot of this silly kind of assertions that we're going to end up doing. So we're just going to say type must be group. That's just another bad request failure. So I don't want to restart this just for this change to take effect, so we're just going to go ahead and make sure that the value is valid, make it private. We don't need IDs. We do need to make sure that the admins have the UID. So let's go ahead and figure out what the UID is. That's this one. Let's hop over. It's there, and then that's also in the participants. So yeah, if we execute this, hopefully it should work and it should create a record, and it did not. So the requested resource not found. Yeah, so this is just a problem. Maybe it's supposed to be AWS. This is this is just the fact that I have many different AWS accounts, and I need to specify the profile, otherwise it won't know how to talk to that DynamoDB table. So yeah, so I'm just gonna have to restart this, and in a couple of seconds I should be able to try it out again. So let's give it a try one more time. Hopefully, okay, now we got an error. That's probably good. Type must be private or group. Did we not do that? Type is private. Oh, I know why. It's not equal to this. Whatever. Let's just write it a little bit better. We'll just say if this is not true, that means that it's neither. So I gotta restart this again. Third time's the charm. Okay. Validation reasons, validation stuff done. So we're gonna try to figure out the root cause of this time around. So it looks like we have our payload, and yeah, so trying to create this particular payload, but as you can see, we're missing the partition key and the sort key. The reason why is that we just have this payload that's coming in from the server. It's just a JSON object, and it doesn't have the constructor acting on it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to say just run the constructor on it, so that way it goes through and it initializes the sort key and the partition key as well. So Maybe there's better ways, but right now I just think that's the way I want to do it. Over time, some approaches don't work, or they don't seem to make sense, or they're just a little bit annoying. We just end up fixing it later on. It's probably fine for now. I guess the only other way to do it is to actually make that change inside of create, and I don't know, maybe it's not. Whatever. Maybe it is. It's probably better to do it here. We can just say, here's incoming model, we'll just say const. Yeah, there we go. That's just going to make sure that it runs the constructor in case it wasn't run before. So we don't really need that anymore. So let's just try that. Just a little bit cleaner. It's just it doesn't look right when you have to create a new. Yeah. Cool. Let's try this again. Awesome. So this time it actually it went ahead and created the record. So partition key, sort key. Let's go ahead and see if that if it exists in AWS. So I'm gonna just log in. Okay, so let's go over to our AWS. Yeah, so the two records are here, and the chats object over here, and the other one exists as well. So now we're going to go ahead and start modifying the rest of the. Yeah, go ahead and retrieve it, and then go ahead and update it. All right. So in the same format, we want to use the use cases. So we'll just say return, await, and that's going to take the logger, and it's going to take the ID, and it's going to return it. But it also is important to make sure that we do a little bit of validation. Sometimes we don't want to let people that are not participants to be able to view it. Retrieve the chat object. So we'll just say we do want that session information, and we'll pass that in as well. So we do a little bit of validation. Cool. So all right. Let's go ahead and create this use case. logger, and then we'll just say return async function that takes in the ID as the parameter, the chat ID, and then on session that returns the chat. Okay, import everything. Let's cool. And then back here, we'll just make sure perfect. And we need, no wait, don't we? Wait, we don't need to go right there. And all the missing imports, make sure they're correct. Okay, so I want to make sure that the person who can retrieve the chat is either an admin or they are a participant. So let's make sure we retrieve the chat first. Okay. If chat doesn't exist, right, we do want to do this. If the item doesn't exist, we don't want to return the actual chat object, we want to just return null out of this. So that is, can be a chat or it can be something that's undefined. Okay, and hopefully, well, anyway, if chat doesn't exist, we'll just throw new failure, not found, and we just return not found failure. Otherwise, user has to be participant. Admins are participants, so we'll just go ahead and just check that one property. Okay, that is not true. We have to return unauthorized. Not unauthorized. There we go. Now otherwise, we can return. That's it. So that should help us retrieve the chat. And before we test it, we might as well implement the update chat functionality as well. We still need the payload and the session, and then make sure that we use the auth session, make it available for us. Async. Promise chat. Yeah. Let's import everything that's missing. So what do we need to update in this? Eventually, we would like to see the chat settings being updated, but right now, the only thing that can be updated is whether or not we want to add participants or remove them. So add, if you want to add participants, that's fine. But if you want to remove participants, we do want to make sure that there is at least one admin on the chat that is still a participant. Okay, so adding is fine. Actually, let's just skip the entire, just skip the entire let's just not implement this right now, because I don't think we'll need, anyway, we don't really need a way to update the chat right now. In fact, I think it's probably better to use different endpoints to add and remove participants of the chat than actually using the chat object to do that. So let's just implement the retrieve chat for now. So this is the ID. And then let's make sure that we can try to retrieve it, but there's a chance that this is not going to work because we haven't actually seen the retrieve function. Oh, maybe it will. Okay, let's give it a shot. Let's just retry this, restart it. Okay, it's running, takes a few seconds. Let's run this. Requested resource not found. Wonder why. Requested resource not found. Is that because, yes, I always forget. Gotta provide that profile if you're using multiple credentials on AWS. Give it one more try. Okay, so we're able to retrieve it. Now that we have the ability to create chats, we want to start with the ability to add participants and remove participants. So yeah, let's do that. So our chats controller is going to basically, we can say post so if you want to add a participant, we can use that endpoint, and we can just copy all this and make modifications to the names here. Add participant. All that is good. the type. It's not going to return the entire chat. Maybe it just returns Boolean. Whether it's successful or not. And then lastly, we want a method that says net participant. That takes in the ID of the chat. And then it's going to have a payload. Oops. And we want the session as well. The payload is going to be for lack of a better name, so we'll just actually make this add participants, so it can take an array. So if you want to add multiple people as participants, you can go ahead and do that. Yeah, okay. So we need there we go, and that's just it's a string array. Okay. So there we have it, and then we can say return 08 add use case, and then it can take in the params ID for the chat ID, and it's going to take in the payload, and it's going to take in the session. All right, so in the future, I might make this a better endpoint, sorry, a better response, but I'll just say I want to retrieve the chat first, right? And if that doesn't exist, return the not found failure, and the request has to be coming from the admin, one of the admins. So if the admins does not include the session ID, then you're not authorized to do this, obviously. So not authorized. Not authorized failure. And then lastly, we can just say participants dot concat. We want to get the payload. Right, the payload is not actually chat, so I made a mistake here. It is the add participant request. So let's go ahead and do that. I might clean up a lot of these method names if a better name turns up. but for now, cannot type. There we go. So let's say a participant already exists and we add another part, we add them twice, they would end up appearing in this list 2 times, right? So to avoid that, we can just say, we can just use Lodash to get the unique element. And I believe this is the method that we need to use, so I can always just check that. Lodash documentation. I think that's the one. So let's see. Thanks. Unique. Yeah, that's exactly what we need. So get me the unique list of participants, and we are good to go. We just go ahead and say chat.update chat. And that is going to be awaited. Then we can say there's no errors, obviously. If there's an error, it's just going to throw an error, and just it will return an error through the framework. So let's go ahead and from add participants. Okay, so all right, so let's test this endpoint next. So we have, well, we forgot to save it. Okay, so this time around, we want to add a brand new participant in that list. This is the admin, and I'm just going to go ahead and add, just change one number so it's a new participant. It doesn't, we don't really know that this account exists, but that's really not the concern for this particular endpoint right now, at least. So we just want to call the method to add an endpoint and just do it. Okay, so before we do that, let me just log in one more time so that I have, oh, looks like there was an error somewhere. Did my, I see what's going on here. Did we not save it? Right, we did not save it. Okay, there we go. I also believe that we do need to change, yeah, the parameter is this, but we also want to say API body I guess it's not really needed because we do have that body type declared here. Let's just take a quick look and see if we can run this. Getter ID token, and I really just want to make sure that we have the latest set of credentials. So when we reload this page, we're going to lose everything, so I really don't want to do that. I have to retrace my steps, so I'm just going to do it now because everything's pasted. Anyway. All right, so what was that chat ID? Oh no, okay, that's fine, I have it here. So this is the chat ID, and let's paste it. Interesting, the body is not recognized. That's probably the issue here. Let me fix that. I want to make sure Swagger is up to date as we start adding features. So API body schema. Oh no, it's type. Is this? Okay. Let's try it. Yeah, that is not quite what I was hoping for. And the reason is this API property. So we need to actually include that as a property in the API for it to be picked up. And we actually need this to be an array. So let's do that. Doesn't work. Let's try that. Instead of running this, I'm just going to run the debug version of the code so that it just automatically restarts the app anytime I make a change. I just prefer that. Okay. Continue. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so now we're good. So add that as the ID, and then we're just going to go ahead and take the entire GUID here, make a quick modification. We'll just say Bob instead of Alice, and execute this. There was an error. Okay, what is the error? Let's just see. What could the error be? Yes, we have to authorize our request. So let's go ahead and do that. It's coming from the ID token. Okay. Let's hop over. Let's add our ID token, and then okay. Attribute value is used. It's not defined by that. Interesting. Okay, so it looks like adding a participant is a step that will cause the updated at property to change. So we'll just say, and then we'd say let's just update the two properties over here, because that's going to require mod. And then run it again. So is it the debug that's supposed to restart every single time? I think it's start dev. All right, one more time to try this out. Hopefully, okay. So we got the body back as true. We'll fix this later on. I don't know. Maybe there's a better way to respond for this kind of an event. But so let's see if the participants are added. If not, we got some more debugging to do. This is going to be the moment of truth. So, all right. So we don't have a new participant added. Why is that? So we added the 2 participants, payload participants on these guys. So let's just add some logging here. That's coming from the payload. And I also want to make sure that we have the chat participants listed here. Okay. npm. There we go. All right, go ahead and try this again. So we're going to add this participant, Bob. So these are the 2 participants. And what's going on here? If we just join them. One more time. Joined is null. Payload.participants. So that is concerning. Interesting. Payload. Oh, come on. It is just a single item, because this is a string of. Anyway, yeah. If you know what the problem is, obviously, it's just me making a. Okay, it's gonna work this time around. I just made an array out of something that's always also going to be an array, so obviously that's not going to work. Anyway. So we don't need all of this stuff, but yeah, we can still keep that here, but we'll save it after we test it out once. Hopefully it'll work this time around when we add Bob as a participant. So let's just take a quick look. Hasn't quite worked because we don't see Alice in this list. Add participants. And yeah, so this time around we just need to make sure that we are passing in our input correctly, like this, and it says it's true. It was able to save it, and now let's just see if it added Bob in our. Okay, so there we go. So now we have our participant. Bunch of typos and just not thinking things clearly caused an extra few moments to debug. But anyway, now we have added our participant. Let's just go ahead and quickly add an ability to remove participants as well. So post, it makes sense to use a delete operator to pass in the request. Delete doesn't take a body, right? So what we do want is, in that case, so we're posting into the participants to this request. So we're going to actually rename this to update participants, and we're going to say add participants, and then we'll take a list of participants to remove over here. In that way, we can rename this method to update, and this is going to be update update participants request, and then same thing over here. A few other error messages. That's right, because this has changed name. So we want to add our participants first, and then we can say chat dot say chat dot participants dot. Now we want to do payload dot remove participants for each, and just say you can use a Lodash, I guess. Participants and the predicate is if they are matching, we'll just go ahead and remove it for every single one. And at this point in time, it'd be all right. So right, we have to save it. Yeah, sorry about that. I was getting a crazy cough there. Okay, so let's just reload this and let's give it a try one more time. We'll use this as the parameters, and we're going to say, let's add Dan as well, and then add one more John as a participant, and we'll remove Bob, who was a participant before. So this time around, we expect to see the ID to change. So let's do a quick query first. And before we do that, we still need to make sure that we pass in our authentication token. So where's this? Give me my ID, please. Okay, let's put that in here. And okay, let's just make the screen a little bit smaller so we can see a little bit more here. So let's just execute this. We have Alice and Bob in the current participants. Alice is the admin, the person that's making the request, and we're going to go ahead and say, let's change the participants in this list. We got back a true. That means that Bob should no longer be in the participants list, but instead Dan and John should be. So let's go ahead and do that. There we go. Okay, so this is working so far. We can just change who the participants are going to be. This doesn't mean that Bob will no longer have access to previous messages. Obviously, it'll be on to Bob's device, so they can still see that. But going forward, they will not be part of the conversation. So that's kind of the way things are going to end up working. Okay. For now, let's not worry about the admins list. We will get to that later. I'm going to think a little bit more about like how what it means to be an admin in a decentralized chat perspective. It is anything different from traditional chat apps. So for now, it's a good place to stop. And what we're going to do next is basically start sending messages on a particular chat. And if you're a participant, you can send a message, and if you're a participant, you can read a message. It's basically as simple as that. Maybe we can edit the message after it's been sent as well. So we can revisit the chat model and we're going to revisit the message model, and we'll start adding the other endpoints so that messages can be sent back and forth.